It is interesting to note at this point the observation made by Morton J. Netzorg about American books on the Philippines and the Filipinos after World War II. Quote, the attitude expressed toward Filipinos changed radically with World War II. No longer are Filipinos in books for boys, niño, sneaky, treacherous. They are noble and brave and self-sacrificing. But this does not make the writers more expert or more accurate or actually more heedful of local nuances. Unquote.
The Filipino Library. After finishing her master's degree, Sarah Salabado was assigned to teach children's literature in college back in 1955. Without having any children's literature course, she had to do a lot of research and studying to prepare teaching it. But looking through various places, she found mostly American and European children's literature she had in her early school days. The iconic comic books, magazines, and Filipino books for adults that high school students like herself read are Philippine History and Stories by Conrado Benitez, Daughters for Sale and Other Plays by Carlos Romulo, Stories of Great Filipinos by Francisco Benitez and Conrado Benitez, Little Poems by Little People from the pupils of Jose Abad Santos Memorial School, When I Was a Little Boy by Ivy Malyari, Mga Tulang Pambata sa Hardinang Mga Tula by Rufino Alejandro, and the first Tagalog magazine after the war to publish novels in full, Aliwan, and The Liwayway and Sinag ng Tala that also serialized novels in Tagalog. Teachers were encouraged to prepare books themselves. Among those were Stories of Our Country by Amado Agorilla and Stories of Our Golden Past by Rosho Dumawal. Sarah decided to re-educate herself in the indigenous culture of her country in order to research, reproduce, and create new materials. She practiced with her children and agreed to share her stories when asked by Paz Marquez Benitez of the Philippine Journal of Education to write for the journal. Her stories were The Little Lizard, Bagol, and The Christmas Lantern. Sarah decided to educate herself in the indigenous culture of her country in order to research, reproduce, and create new materials. Alabado wanted to bring her works into color for Filipino Children's Reading Fair, but Paz Benitez wasn't ready for the venture. She then approached a technician at the journal plant if there was a machine that could print four colors and bought her own printing press. That was when she became a publisher and named her publishing house the Filipino Library, naming it after the American Library, and the titles were named Bobby Benedicto Books. Starting her new career, she invited various artists to illustrate her work, but none agreed until she met Antonio Liwag and Ben-Hur Villanueva. Then, The Little Wizard was released in 1960, a year after continuously working on it. This picture book became the first of its kind in the history of children's literature in the Philippines. After their first success, Alabado created and published more picture books with Ben-Hur Villanueva, such as The Big Lonely House and Other Stories, Tupo and the Blowpipe, The Proud Hen, and Tugmang Pilipino by Virginia Palma Bonifacio. Children's books like this have great impact to children growing up, from the creativity of the illustration, the use in storytelling, to the stories that may greatly affect his development and future decisions. And the Filipino Library, according to Loreto Serena, was the most significant development of the Philippine children's literature. Alabado did not learn how to properly market them and can no longer sustain book production financially. She ended up donating books to public libraries and orphanage. But realizing the need for Filipino children to have their own books, she reached out to then First Lady Luz Banson Magsaysay and various personages to help organize a non-stock, non-profit organization.
In 1962, Pamana Incorporated was established to initiate the production and promote writing and reading of Filipino children's books. In 1918, Pamana called for commercial publishers to establish a children's book desk or division in the United States, known as Macmillan, but it failed to move them to do so because they were very busy producing textbooks, supplementary, and reference books. In 1962, Bookmark Incorporated published 5 picture books from students of writing and art projects of Maryknoll College, now Miriam College in Quezon City. These picture books were Yauni by Mary Dwyer, The Star That Was Not by Leonora Enriquez, Ramon Goes to the City by Maria Victoria Pamintuan, Pulanito by Fermina Luna, and Toby and the Christmas Bell by Marla Yatoco. They also publish mga salawikain at iba pang pamana ng lahi which compiled by Ligaya C. Benaventura and illustrated by Romeo Manangkil and Benedicto Cabrera. For young adults, Under the Shadow of War by Augusto Pietat was published. Alberto S. Florentino of the Pesa series books for adults and was the book designer of the Pamana books published the Young Readers series. It came up with some titles, mostly retold stories of old Filipino folktales such as Stories of Juan Tamad by Manuel Arquilla, The Legend of Mariang Makiling by Jose Rizal, adapted by Eva Maria Florentino and illustrated by Carlos Valino Jr., and Mir Inisa by Jose Garcia Villa, illustrated by Larry Alcantara. Local publishers like Philippine Book Corporation, Phoenix Publishing House and Pamana Incorporated, Bookman Incorporated, and Bookmark Incorporated were encouraged to publish 2 or 3 titles that were not textbooks and readers. The following books were published under the Young People's Library series by the Philippine Appliance Corporation. These are Filipino Rites and Rituals, Filipino Myths and Legends, Games Filipino Children Play, Profiles in Achievement, Pagdiriwang 1 and 2, Filipino Arts and Crafts, which are all colorfully illustrated. In 1928, the first American picture book was published, which became a starting point for the improvement of techniques in the field of graphic arts and also the output of many fine artists and writers all over the world. One of these is Jose Aluego, a Filipino illustrator and author in the United States.
In 1961, the Rizal Law was passed which made the teaching of Rizal compulsory in all grade levels. Many authors wrote books to meet the need for simple materials that would propagate Rizal's life and his novels, Noli and Fili and his other works. Young Rizal, El Fili for young readers, Noli for young readers, Rizal series and Rizal flairlets for children were simplified and translated into various editions and dialects. Isabel Taylor Escoda also contributed to the growing list of children's literature with Ati-Atihan and Limericks for Little People. Cyrus Alabado published Cosmic, a monthly science magazine for children and the first of its kind in the country. Cosmic aimed to present the world of science as a world of many doors where even ordinary children can enter and explore its wonders and possibilities. Cosmic would lead children not only to the impressive door of space technology as many as magazines do, but also to other doors which because of their ordinariness were often taken for granted and neglected. Cosmic would open the door to eating for health, to exploration on common happenings like the ringing of a bell, the floating of ice on water, and etc. To cultivate the scientific mind rather than cultivate the worship of products of science like robots, weaponry, and spacecrafts. Cosmic would show to children the process and methods of science. Soon, other publishers, writers, and illustrators heeded the call to serve the children. Alimar's Phoenix Publishing, Ricardo Bolipata, and the Philippine International Publishing, and many other publishers. Alberto Benipayo of Regal Publishing and Benipayo Press and Delphine Manlapas of Manlapas Publishing published Alabado's children's and teenagers' books without thought of profiting them. Benipayo printed the first edition of Kangkong in 1896 and gave almost all of the copies to Cyrus Alabado. Manlapas printed several of her picture books, Given series in full color, and hardbound copies which he likewise delivered all to Cyrus, thinking perhaps he had no market for them, which turned out to be so, for they were donated everywhere they were wanted.
Comic and classic type illustrated books. National Bookstore ventured into simplifying, translating, and modifying from the original some Western and world classics, legends, Bible stories, fairy tales, biographies, epics, and many kinds of literature for children and young people into the comic book format. Manlapas Publishing also published a number of classic type illustrated books dealing with romance and adventure, books on Rizal, Bonifacio, Mabini, and folk literature such as Bernardo Carpio, Mariang Makiling, and Ibong Adarna, and the well-known classic Sorab and Rustum.
In 1946, the first Filipino comic book halakhak was published by Ace Publication owned by Ramon Rosas. For several decades, Ace became the dominant comic book publisher. In line with this year, Jess Santos, who did the first comic feature kidlat in halakhak, was discovered by Tony Velasquez. In 1947, Filipino comics appeared. It became such a tremendous hit that other comic books were published in the 1950s. Hiwaga, Special Comics, Tagalog, Classics, Kenkoy Comics, and Educational Classics are some of these. The success of Ace Publications was attributed to Tony Velasquez, the most popular comic artist in the country. His creation, Kenkoy, was the most famous comic character. In 1969, Jess Santos went to the United States and did illustrations for Davy Crockett Western Publications of Western Publications. In 1955, Ramir was created by Jesus Hodloman inspired the American Prince Valiant. This became very popular and soon was made into a movie. Comic books proliferated, millions of copies were being distributed all over the country and became a very lucrative enterprise for the publishers. Some of these did not seem to have children in mind as their readers, although many children did get to read them for lack of access to alternative reading materials and for such reasons as 1. They were easy reading, 2. They were more exciting and full of suspense and horror, and 3. The action in them was fast and the story was carried through in common everyday language. Unfortunately, in the late 60s or earlier, some comic books had deteriorated to the point where some concerned citizens formed a volunteer watchdog organization called the Citizens Council for Mass Media or CCMM. The CCMM noted the growing immoral content of the comics and launched a campaign to expose them as corruptive and unfit for the reading consumption of the young. Amidst these dark clouds in the comic book horizon, a few silver linings broke through to offset this sad state of affairs. At this point, the publishing world realized it was time to act. It was time that someone filled the gap and satisfied the hunger for true and respectable literature for the young. The Daughters of St. Paul in Pasay City, who are active in media production, started publishing the youngsters. What it lacked in excitement and bluster, it made up with good clean stories and features on good Christian living. The Children's Museum and Library Incorporation, or CMLI, published a quarterly magazine, which had contributions in art, prose, and poetry by grade school children from schools all over the country. Filipino Child Life was published monthly by Alip and Sons Incorporation, featuring informational materials, stories, and poems, and a regular section on curriculum subjects, reading, language, science, and social studies. For Children magazine was published by the Manila Publishing Corporation of the Young People. This simply shows that the problem arises from the content of comics, results for some of the concerned citizens to act, and from this they created organizations that produce readings suitable for the young readers.